Snow fell softly around Jack's secluded cabin, muffling the world beyond. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of pine and smoke from the dying fire inside. Jack, rugged and worn by years of solitude, sat on a creaky stool, sharpening his knife, when a soft knock shattered the stillness. He opened the door to a girl, her cheeks flushed from the cold, eyes wide with uncertainty. Eliza, with swirling sacred marks on her arms, stepped inside, warmth flooding the space. Jack's heart clenched. He'd never seen anything like her. As she settled near the fire, she began to hum an ancient melody. The notes danced through the cabin, wrapping around Jack like a forgotten memory. Something deep stirred within him, a connection he couldn't explain. The shadows flickered, the past creeping in as he listened, caught between the girl before him and the echoes of his grandmother's stories. The wind howled through the skeletal trees surrounding Jack's isolated trapper cabin, sending a chill creeping through the wooden walls. The stove crackled, struggling to fend off the encroaching cold, while shadows danced around the single flickering light bulb overhead. Jack pushed aside the half-eaten loaf of bread on the rough-hewn table, the remnants of his last meal more a reminder of solitude than sustenance. When the door creaked open, he barely stirred, his mind lost in the quiet of winter, a familiar companion against the bleak landscape outside. Then she stepped in, small and frail, clutching a tattered shawl that struggled to contain her. Eliza's eyes were wide, the kind of wide that suggested she had seen things no child should. Dark circles traced her cheeks, and her skin spoke of a life lived under the harshness of neglect, not the tender embrace of childhood. Jack could sense the storm brewing behind her gaze, a tempest of past traumas and unspoken fears. She hesitated at the threshold, her bare feet shifting on the cold wooden floor as if the warmth of the cabin was a mirage. Jack had seen many things in his years alone, but this was different. He took a step closer, feeling an instinctual pull, the weight of her fragility stirring something long buried within himself. The remnants of his own childhood surged up, memories of laughing in sunlit fields, overshadowed by the shadows of loss. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice gruff, yet softened by the concern he could not quite name. She hesitated, glancing back at the blustery darkness outside, the freedom of the storm somehow more comforting than the warmth emanating from his fire. "Eliza," she finally whispered, her voice a mere wisp. Jack watched as she wrapped her shawl tighter around herself, her fingers tracing strange markings woven into its fabric, patterns that twisted and turned like stories begging to be told. A sense of recognition washed over him, but the feeling was fleeting, evasive, retreating like a ghost into the recesses of his mind. All he could see was the girl before him, lost and alone, and he felt a relentless urge to protect her from the world outside, a world that had not been kind to either of them. Teetering on the edge of his instincts, Jack felt the cold barrier of his emotional walls begin to tremble. He cleared his throat, gesturing to a chair, but Eliza only stared at it as if it were a predator waiting to pounce. "Sit. You're safe here," he said, forcing the words through the thick silence. Something flickered in her eyes, a glimmer of trust, perhaps, but it was gone almost as quickly as it came, replaced by a wary hesitance. He understood the distance between them. He felt it resonating through the air, thick and heavy, like the snowfall outside. As they sat in silence, the only sounds echoing in the cabin were the creaking wood and the distant howl of the wind. Jack's gaze wandered to the small object she fidgeted with, a wooden pendant hanging from her neck, faintly glimmering in the dim light. He could see it was ancient, worn smooth by years of touch. In that moment, curiosity mingled with apprehension. "Where did you get that?" he asked, breaking the spell of silence that had cocooned them. Eliza's fingers froze on the pendant as if caught in a sudden grip of memories. "It was my grandmother's," she murmured, and Jack felt a stirring in his heart. Her voice carried an echo of a song, melody intertwined with sadness and resolve, each note a whisper from a lost world he could almost grasp. He leaned forward, intrigued, but Eliza's walls reinforced themselves. "It's just a trinket," she added softly, as if dismissing the weight of her own heritage. Yet Jack didn't believe her. There was something sacred about the way the pendant rested against her chest, something that resonated with the stories he had heard as a child, the tales spun by his own grandmother, warnings wrapped in folklore and wisdom. He longed to know more, to connect the dots between their histories. The isolation of his life had left him starved for stories, for significance, for the touch of connection he had buried under years of solitude. Eliza broke the silence with a soft hum, the melody lifting through the air like a gentle breeze, tender and haunting. Jack found himself drawn closer to her, a flicker of warmth kindling at the edges of his heart. But even as he listened, the emotional distance stretched between them like the vast landscape outside, a reminder that trust was not easily earned, nor stories freely shared. He knew she was here, but emotionally, she remained miles away, locked in her trauma, while he stood at the threshold of understanding, longing to reach her, but unsure if he could break through the barriers life had bestowed upon them both. The path twisted through the dense woods, a narrow ribbon of earth bordered by ancient pines, standing sentinel in silent judgment. Eliza stumbled a little, the weight of her baggage a relentless reminder of the uncertainty that lay ahead. As she broke through the trees, the cabin appeared worn yet sturdy, nestled against a backdrop of shadows and whispering leaves. It exuded a warmth that contrasted sharply with the chill in the air, its wooden walls cradled by the encroaching wilderness. She hesitated at the threshold, her heart thrumming like the wings of a trapped bird. Jack stood at the door, his figure silhouetted against the fiery glow of the hearth within. He was a man forged by solitude, his face weathered and rugged, eyes deep-set and guarded. His breath hung in the cold air, a thick mist that drifted into the night like the past he had long refused to confront. When they locked eyes, an electric tension thickened the atmosphere, neither knowing how to breach the silence that swelled between them. With a reluctant nod, he stepped back, inviting her into what would become an uneasy sanctuary. Eliza crossed the threshold, almost feeling the weight of the cabin's unspoken history settle over her. The interior was dimly lit, shadows playing across the rough-hewn walls, remnants of frozen time dancing in the flickering firelight. A single table sat at the center, bearing the scars of years of use, while a few mismatched chairs were scattered around. The sparse furnishings spoke of a life lived in isolation, a world detached from the warmth of society. Jack followed her in, the door thudding shut behind them, sealing them in their cocoon of uncertainty. "Make yourself at home," he muttered, his voice rough, each word carrying the weight of reluctance. There was an edge to his tone, an implicit warning wrapped within an invitation, as if he feared the sacred marks that adorned Eliza's skin. She took a deep breath, trying to absorb the newness of her surroundings while ignoring the chill that crept into her bones. As she placed her duffel on the floor, the old wood creaked beneath her, a reminder of how long it had endured. She moved to the window, pulling aside a thin curtain. The forest outside loomed like a vast, watchful entity, shadows stretching across the ground like gnarled fingers. Her reflection stared back, a girl marked by secrets, and for a moment she could hardly recognize herself. Jack observed her from the corner of his eye, the raw intensity of her presence unsettling his carefully maintained boundaries. He shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to do next, the silence between them expanding into an uncomfortable chasm. "Dinner," he said abruptly, breaking the quiet with a gruffness that made Eliza jump. "It'll be ready soon." His willingness to provide sustenance felt like an offering and a burden wrapped in one. She nodded, but couldn't match his lack of comfort, anxiety twisting in her stomach. A sense of awkwardness wrapped around them both as she glanced at the modest kitchen, where ingredients lay prepped and waiting, almost as if they had been expecting her arrival all along. As they sat across from each other at the table, the air hummed with the unspoken. Jack served a simple stew, the aroma earthy and rich, but each spoonful felt like a reluctant communion. Eliza's thoughts drifted to the songs that had captured her soul in the field, melodies born from a place she could not shake. The echoes of ancient stories lingered in her heart, urges to share spilling to her lips. She hesitated, feeling the weight of Jack's guarded gaze on her, probing yet distant, as if he were afraid to ask what she carried within. "What brings you out here?" Jack finally asked, his voice low, attempting to pierce the veil of discomfort. Eliza looked up, her gaze steady and intense. "I came to escape," she admitted, her heart racing at the honesty. "Not just from the world, but from who I was." For a flickering moment, vulnerability passed between them, yet Jack's guarded expression returned as quickly as it had faded, walls fortified once more. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the shadows deepened, wrapping around the cabin like a shroud. Their coexistence began in this fragile twilight, a precarious balance teetering on the edge of uncharted territory. Eliza sensed that in the depths of Jack's reticence lay hidden stories, past pains intertwined with her own, like two rivers destined to converge. Inside her, the songs whispered louder, urging her to explore not just the ancient lore within her, but the untold tales that thrummed just beneath Jack's surface, waiting for the courage to rise. The frost-kissed mornings had settled into a routine, as inevitable and rhythmic as the rise and fall of the sun over the pines. Jack woke before dawn, the quiet of the cabin enveloping him like a heavy quilt, the chill biting at his fingers. He moved through the familiar motions, kindling a fire to chase away the morning gloom, the flames crackling to life as if in synchrony with his heartbeat. Eliza, however, was an enigma woven into the fabric of his solitude, her presence both a comfort and disquiet. Each morning, she sat upon the worn chair by the window, her sacred marks glistening in the pale light, almost ethereal as she hummed low tunes, a melody that echoed with stories unsaid. Days stretched into weeks, their solitude punctuated by the whispers of wind and the distant calls of wildlife. Jack found himself watching Eliza more than he should have, his gaze lingering on the way she brushed her hair back, or how her fingers danced over the wooden table like they were conjuring magic. She would often break into song, her voice sweet and haunting, as if it carried the weight of worlds lost to time. Each note tugged at something deep within him, a yearning he couldn't quite articulate. Yet, with each melody came an undercurrent of sorrow, a shadow that made him ache with a longing he feared to voice. Their conversations, though sparse, were laced with a tension, an invisible thread weaving them closer, even as Jack felt the weight of unasked questions between them. He was captivated by the stories she barely told, fragments of a past shrouded in mystery. One evening, after the sun dipped below the horizon, he leaned against the rough-hewn wall, his arms crossing defensively over his chest. "Where did you learn to sing like that?" he asked, the inquiry escaping before he could tame it. Eliza paused, her eyes darting to the floor as if the boards held answers. "It's just something that comes from deep inside," she replied softly, her voice tremulous like the flickering shadows cast by the fire. Jack could see the moment she recoiled, the weight of her history pressing heavy on her shoulders. He swallowed hard, feeling the frustration rise within him. The way she clung to her secrets felt like a barrier, separating them even as they lived within the same walls. He wanted to break through, to reach for the girl, who felt both familiar and foreign, but the fear of her rejection held him back. As the nights grew colder and the snow began to cloak the world outside, Jack spent hours in the dim light of the cabin, poring over his grandmother's old journals, hoping to glean a semblance of clarity amidst the scribbled memories. In those pages, he found stories of love, loss, and the intricate dance of fate that wove them together. Each time he stumbled upon a passage that hinted at the sacred marks, the symbols etched into Eliza's skin, his breath quickened. He sensed fragments of her story mirrored in his own family's history, as though the two were bound by invisible threads stretching across time. One morning, as the howling wind rattled the cabin, he found Eliza perched by the window again, her fingers tapping a rhythm on the table. Approaching her cautiously, he felt an electric charge fill the air. "You know, my grandmother wrote about symbols like yours," he ventured, trying to maintain a facade of nonchalance despite the rapid thudding of his heart. Eliza's head snapped up, her eyes wide and wary, their depths darkened with uncertainty. The moment hung between them, charged and taut, each of them dancing on the precipice of vulnerability. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, a flicker of hope breaking through her guarded expression. It sent an unexpected wave of warmth through him, the realization that she wanted to share, even if only a fraction of what lay beneath her surface. Jack forced himself to breathe, the intimacy pulling at him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He could feel the rush of something profound stirring within him, a bond that was forming, straining against the boundaries of their shared silence. "I mean, your marks. They're in her stories. They're tied to the land, to the cycles of life," he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Maybe they hold a key to understanding you." Eliza's expression shifted, a mixture of fear and vulnerability swirling in her gaze. The crackle of the fire seemed to echo the tension as Jack's truth hung there, the weight of it both binding and liberating. The unspoken fear that consumed them both felt palpable, yet there was something electric in the air, a whisper of possibility that urged them to leap into the unknown. In that moment, Jack felt the distance between them begin to wane, the space that had once seemed insurmountable, now tinged with the warmth of burgeoning connection. He reached out, brushing a fingertip against her forearm, tracing the contours of her sacred marks with reverence. Eliza held his gaze, her breath hitching, and for the first time Jack felt as if the shadows of their pasts were merging, threading through him, binding him to her. The song that had echoed through the cabin now felt like a promise, one that beckoned them closer, even amid the weight of secrets yet unfolded. The wind howled outside the small cabin, rattling the thin timber walls, as Jack meticulously worked at the fire. Each spark that flared briefly illuminated the shadows, casting flickering images of a world long untouched. Outside, the relentless flurries continued to weave a tapestry of white. Within, the warmth wrapped around Eliza like a fragile embrace. She huddled near the hearth, her hands cupping a mug of steaming tea, the faint scent of herbs mingling with the air. Even in this sanctuary, something uneasy woven through the silence. Eliza's eyes traced the patterns of the flames, her mind elsewhere, tangled in thoughts of her past. The sacred marks on her skin felt like a weight, heavy and burdensome. She had spent years running from them, trying to silence the whispers they conjured in the night. As she looked up, drawn by the sound of crackling wood, she met Jack's gaze, intense and searching. There was a split second, a moment where she could see the shadows in his eyes, the burden he carried. But then he turned away, the firelight casting flickers of doubt across his brow. "Why do you keep looking at me like that?" Eliza found her voice, surprising herself. The question clung in the air, thick with unspoken vulnerability. She felt exposed, and the warmth of the cabin couldn't chase away the chill creeping into her bones. Jack's surprise was palpable, and he paused, his movements stilled as he considered his answer. Around them, the storm raged louder, as if eager to drown out their exchange. "It's just, you remind me of something," Jack finally said, though his voice trembled as he uttered the words. He ran a hand through his unruly hair, eyes falling to the floor as if the planks held some ancient truth he feared to uncover. "I guess it's the way you carry yourself. You seem burdened." The confession hung between them, raw and unguarded. A flicker of hurt passed through Eliza. She wanted to reject his insight, to shove it away as one would a persistent winter chill. "You don't know anything about me," she snapped, the defensive tone startling even herself. The sudden fierceness was a shield, and she felt the heat rising in her cheeks, both from anger and guilt for lashing out. Jack's expression shifted, hurt flashing in his eyes like a spark in the dark. "Maybe I don't," he replied, voice low, "but I can see you're fighting something." His words were calm, yet struck with an intensity that wrapped around her, pulling her deeper into a moment she didn't want to face. The room felt smaller, tension thickening the air, as if they were trapped in this vortex of understanding and misunderstanding all at once. Eliza turned back towards the fire, unable to meet his eyes. Her heart raced, and she felt the pulse of her sacred marks against her skin, reminding her of all she had run from, the traditions she had rejected. "It's just a story," she whispered, half to herself. "A song I learned long ago." "Then share it," Jack urged gently, his voice softer now, a plea against the backdrop of the storm. "Maybe it'll help." Eliza hesitated, her chest tightening as memories flooded her mind. The echoes of her childhood, the lullabies sung under starlit skies, the warmth of another's embrace, now all obscured by the weight of loss and secrecy. Jack's unwavering gaze was filled with an expectation she didn't know if she could satisfy. Yet something in the vulnerable way he stood, as if he too had uncoverings buried beneath his own skin, coaxed her forward. "I used to sing it with my grandmother," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper, "about the connection between us and the land, how we have to learn to listen to the whispers of the earth." The words fell awkwardly from her lips, but with each syllable she felt a crack in her barrier. They stared into the fire, and she could almost see her grandmother's warm smile in the embers, a forgotten melody stirring within her. Jack took a step closer, the distance between them shrinking as he moved closer to the warmth of her voice, to the echoes of a past untold. In that moment, surrounded by the chaos outside, Eliza began to unveil a bit of her soul, searching for the courage to bridge the gap that had formed between them. A connection waiting to be forged under the weight of shared stories, the shadows of their pasts entwined in the flickering light of the cabin. The wind howled outside the cabin, a mournful sound that echoed the confusion within. Jack sat at the rough-hewn table, staring at the small lantern that flickered defiantly against the shadows gathering in the corners. The warmth from the fire crackled softly beside him, but he felt the chill seep deep into his bones, a stark reminder of the isolation surrounding them. Eliza stood by the window, her silhouette framed by the darkness that swallowed the world outside, her breath fogging the glass. In the silence, a tension hung between them, unspoken, yet palpable. Eliza turned slowly, her gaze falling on Jack. The way the light danced across her skin revealed the sacred marks etched along her arms, each swirl and line pulsating with a life of their own. In the warmth of the cabin, they seemed to glow faintly, a beacon against the night. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that these marks were a bridge to something shared, something that lay buried deep within him, just waiting to be unearthed. He shifted in his chair, his heart racing as Eliza stepped closer. Each footfall was a fragile whisper on the wooden floor, drawing him deeper into the mystery that enveloped her. "Do you ever feel like a part of you is missing?" Eliza's voice broke the silence, soft yet resolute. She wasn't looking for answers. She was merely sharing her truth, a truth that resonated with Jack's own hidden fears. He swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling over him like a heavy blanket. How many nights had he grappled with the ghosts of his past, wrestling with memories of his grandmother and the tales she had spun like silk? He nodded, unable to articulate the longing that surged within him, afraid of the darkness that could spill forth if he spoke. Eliza moved closer, her eyes searching his for understanding. "I feel it in my bones," she continued, a tremor lacing her words. "Like there are echoes of forgotten songs trapped in my soul, waiting for the right moment to break free." Jack's heart raced at her confession. He recognized in her the same yearning that had followed him like a shadow, the feeling that their lives were tied to stories yet to be told. It was as if she had opened a door he didn't know existed, and through it, sunlight poured in, illuminating the spaces that had long been shrouded in darkness. Impulsively, Jack stood up, the need to bridge the gap between them overwhelming. He reached out, his calloused fingers brushing against the soft skin of her arm, tracing one of the sacred marks. Eliza inhaled, the warmth of his touch igniting something in both of them. For a moment, they were suspended in time, a connection forged in the unlikeliest of places, two wandering souls finding solace in each other amidst the biting cold of the world outside. Jack's heart raced as he tried to decipher the language of her silence, the unspoken bond that seemed to pulse in the air between them. Eliza lifted her gaze, and in that shared moment, a flicker of recognition sparked. Jack felt as though he was staring into a mirror, reflecting parts of himself he had long denied. The stories of his grandmother, filled with sacred tales of love, loss, and the intertwining of lives, swirled in his mind. Each memory collided with the present, pulling him deeper into the resonance of her song, one he had never heard but could feel echoing within Eliza. They stood there, caught in an embrace of unknowing, the unbreakable tie forming between them, transcending their individual histories. As Jack's fingers lingered on her skin, he felt a strange warmth seep into his own heart, binding them together in an unseen thread. Eliza exhaled softly, and in that moment they shared a secret, a promise of understanding that went beyond words. The fear that had once held Jack captive began to melt away, replaced by a burgeoning hope that perhaps together they could uncover the truths that lay dormant in their bloodlines. He took a step back, breathless, as if stepping away from a powerful force he had never anticipated. Eliza smiled, her face illuminating the dim cabin. It was a smile that spoke of understanding, compassion, and a shared journey ahead. "There's a song I've been trying to remember," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "One that my grandmother used to sing to me." Her admission hung in the air like a promise, and Jack felt as if the pieces of a puzzle were aligning, her song, his grandmother's stories. Each word she spoke felt like an invitation to explore the depths of their shared lineage, an adventure waiting to unravel. They settled into a newfound quietude, the weight of the world momentarily lifted. Jack knew they were on the cusp of something profound, two hearts finding a rhythm amid the chaos. As Eliza began to hum a haunting melody, Jack closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him, weaving together the strands of their lives in a tapestry uniquely their own. In that moment, he realized they were not just two isolated souls. They were bound by an ancient dance of stories, his grandmother's legacy, sung through a girl with sacred marks, waiting to be found. Eliza stood at the edge of the clearing, the dense woods encircling her like the uncharted corners of her soul. The morning light cut through the canopy, dappling the ground with patches of gold, yet it felt too bright for the shadows that haunted her heart. She could hear Jack moving about the cabin, his tools clanging softly as he prepared for another day in the wilderness. A part of her wanted to retreat from this life, to slip back into the familiar embrace of solitude. Yet another part pulled her toward him, drawing her into a world that had begun to feel like home, even as it threatened to reveal truths she wasn't ready to face. The marks on her skin thrummed with a pulse of their own, a reminder of the legacy she carried, one that Jack didn't fully understand. She had tried to hide them, to bury the weight of her ancestry beneath layers of denial. But here, with Jack, the truth simmered just beneath the surface, begging to be confronted. Every time he looked at her, she felt the warmth of his gaze peeling away her defenses, exposing the raw, trembling honesty of who she truly was. It was terrifying. She could almost taste the bitter tang of her fear mixing with the sweet essence of hope. As Jack stepped outside, the frost-laden air puffed around him like a ghostly breath. He approached her, hands trembling slightly from the chill and something deeper. an unspoken concern. "You okay?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tremors threatening to spill from his heart. Eliza nodded, the motion an instinctive reflex, yet inside she was screaming. Did he see the storm brewing in her eyes? Did he hear the wild echoes of her thoughts crashing against one another? Jack took a step closer, studying her with a sincerity that pierced her carefully crafted walls. "You don't have to pretend around me, Eliza. I see you." His words were gentle, wrapping around her like the warmth of a fire on a cold night, urging her to speak, to let the dam within break. But the river of her emotions was a turbulent one, filled with rocks of doubt and pools of regret. She felt herself being swept away, trapped in the undertow of her memories, and it was terrifying. Tension hung in the air, a fragile thread waiting to snap. "What if I'm not who you think I am?" she finally whispered, the question heavy with the weight of her truth. Jack's brow creased with confusion, but there was no fear in his eyes, only a willingness to shoulder whatever burden she carried. Her heart pulsed wildly, the sacred marks on her skin glowing with a fervor that made her shiver. "I'm different," she choked out, each word weighted with the shadows of her past. "I don't care about different. I care about you," Jack replied, his voice firm yet tender. "What's scaring you, Eliza? You can tell me." The challenge in his words hung like mist around them, and for a moment, Eliza felt as if the entire forest held its breath, waiting for her to leap into the abyss of honesty. The fear of falling was paralyzing, the thought of exposing her soul to the light, both exhilarating and horrifying. "I don't want to share my darkness with anyone," she confessed, tears pooling in her eyes. "What if it consumes you too?" The words spilled forth like pent-up water breaking through a dam, and Jack stepped closer, his hand reaching out as if to bridge the chasm between them. "Eliza, we all have darkness. It doesn't have to consume us if we face it together." His voice was soft yet unwavering, the kind of anchor she hadn't realized she needed. In that moment, she felt a crack form within her, the facade she had held onto crumbling like frost under the warmth of the sun. Eliza took a shaky breath, the truth choking her as it fought for freedom. The song that echoed in her mind, the one her grandmother used to sing, tugged at the edges of her consciousness, urging her to be brave. She pictured the woman who had whispered tales of their sacred lineage, stories woven with shadows and light. It was time to reclaim that legacy, to sing her own truth. With a resolve she didn't know she possessed, Eliza finally opened her mouth, her voice trembling like the winter air. "I have these marks because I'm meant to bring forth the old songs, to heal the land, the people, but it's a burden I fear I cannot bear." The admission hung heavy in the air, yet in the act of sharing her truth, she felt the stirrings of hope take root. Jack's gaze softened, his unwavering presence an invitation to continue, to explore the depths of her own song. In that moment, amidst the encroaching trees and the frost-kissed earth, an understanding sparked between them, one that could forge a path through the shadows, one sacred mark at a time. The morning light filtered through the gaps in the wooden cabin, casting a soft, golden hue over the small room where Eliza sat, tracing the crescent-shaped marks on her arm. Each curve and dip danced like memories that had long been locked away. Jack, stirring from a fitful sleep, caught sight of her, an aching swell of protectiveness enveloping his chest. He moved closer, drawn by the haunting melody that had slipped past her lips in the deep of night. It was a song infused with a sorrow he could not fathom, yet felt intimately familiar. As the day unfolded, the air crackled with a tension that had been building since Eliza first crossed the threshold of his solitude. The tranquil wilderness surrounding them felt like a fragile glass dome, containing emotions ready to shatter. Eliza felt it too, each note of her song lingering in the air, echoing against the backdrop of the serene pines. Jack listened, enraptured, as she sang of lost souls and ancient trees that whispered forgotten tales. Every word seemed to unlock a forgotten door within him, revealing fragments of his past. His grandmother's stories of the sacred marks and the power they held. Jack's memories coiled around him like a fog, thickening as he recalled evenings spent at his grandmother's side, her voice weaving together the fabric of their family's history. The way she had spoken of a girl marked by destiny, a lineage that intertwined with the land itself, infused his heart with unease. He felt the weight of this revelation growing, a palpable longing to understand what it all meant. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, the walls a confining embrace, and he could no longer ignore the mounting connection between Eliza and his family's legacy. As twilight descended, he found himself pacing, seeking answers amid the shadows dancing in the corners. Eliza's song lingered in the air, pulling him back to her like a moth to flame. He had tried to dismiss it, but he could no longer resist the truth blossoming within him. When he turned to her, his heart pounding, he saw something shift in her eyes, an acknowledgement of a shared understanding that transcended words. They were bound together by something far older than either of them, and fear clenched at his throat. "Your song? It feels like my grandmother," he said, his voice cracking slightly under the weight of revelation. He took a step closer, bridging the space between them. "She spoke of a girl like you. The marks, they weren't just stories, were they?" His heart raced as he watched memories flicker across her face, her own ghosts awakened. This was the moment of reckoning he had anticipated, the moment where their souls could either intertwine or unravel. Eliza hesitated, but the truth poured from her like a river breaking through its dam. "I've carried this song within me, Jack. It's a part of my lineage, passed down through generations. I thought it was just a tale, but it isn't. It's the spirit of our ancestors, and your grandmother knew about it." The rawness in her voice resonated with him, and he felt the profound weight of their shared history pressing against them. At that moment, the walls of the cabin fell away, and he saw the vast, haunting landscape of their intertwined destinies. The words spilled out, an unbroken thread binding them to the past. Jack realized that the isolation he had sought was no longer a refuge. It was a prison. The songs he had thought to ferret away in silence were now resonating through the very core of his being. He stepped closer, enveloping her in the warmth of understanding and connection. "We are meant to be part of this story, Eliza. Your marks, my past, they bind us." A moment of silence enveloped them, the air thick with dormant emotions. Eliza looked deep into his eyes, and in that gaze he saw her vulnerability and strength intertwined. They stood on the precipice of their shared fate, and the realization of their connection sent tremors through the ground beneath them. They had both longed for recognition of their place in the world and with each other. In that instant, the fragile threads of their lives wove into a tapestry grander than either could have imagined, and then, with a breath that seemed to seal the promise between them, Eliza began to sing once more. This time, the melody rose up, a symphony of truth that reverberated through the trees, casting aside the shadows of doubt. Jack took her hand, their fingers intertwining, feeling the warmth of her marks against his skin, a reminder of the legacy they had inherited. Together, they embraced the emotions that surged through them, letting go of the isolation that had once defined their existence. The cabin became a sanctuary, a place where two souls could confront their past and forge a new future, side by side, as the echoes of their song danced into the twilight. In the dim twilight, the last rays of sun spilled gold across the snow-dusted pines, each flake twinkling like forgotten dreams. Eliza stood at the edge of the clearing, the sacred marks on her skin aglow with the fading light. Jack lingered behind, hands roughened from years of solitude. Yet they trembled as he reached out, the space between them thick with unspoken words. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the echo of Eliza's song, a melody that wrapped around them, weaving the past and present into a single thread. Jack took a step forward, his heart pounding like the distant drum of a tribe long lost. He knelt, the cold earth pressing against his knees, and cupped his hands around the warmth of the sacred symbols etched into her skin, tracing the stories of her ancestors. Eliza turned, her eyes reflecting the deepening twilight, a mirror to his soul. In that silence, they shared a moment more profound than any spoken vow, a promise of understanding, of kinship, of healing. As shadows lengthened and stars began to twinkle in the vast sky, they stood together, two souls intertwined in the hush of the world, bound by the weight of history and the light of hope.